A family vanished midair during a scenic helicopter tour with no wreckage, no bodies, no clues, just silence. 3 years later, a hiker stumbles upon something in the forest that turns this cold case into the most chilling mystery you've ever heard. In the summer of 2018, the Monroe family lifted off in a private helicopter for what was supposed to be a scenic anniversary celebration above the Washington wilderness. It was a bright morning. It's a kind of sky that pilots describe as glasscalm, not a storm cloud in sight, no erratic winds, perfect visibility. Nathan Monroe had rented the tour as a gift for his wife, Claire, their twin daughters. Lily and Ava, both 6 years old, were bubbling with excitement. Everything looked ordinary from the outside, just another family seizing a beautiful day. No one knew it would be the last time anyone saw them alive. The Monroes were well liked in their community near Tacoma. Nathan ran a modest real estate firm. Claire was a part-time art teacher at an elementary school. They were warm, present, grounded people, devoted to their girls and active in local events. Nothing in their life hinted at danger. When they didn't return from the tour that evening, no one panicked at first. Helicopter excursions often ran longer than scheduled, but by nightfall, when the aircraft hadn't checked back into any known airstrip and no communication had come from the pilot, concern turned to dread. A search was launched the next morning. A coordinated effort involving the FAA, local sheriffs, private rescue contractors, and even amateur drone hobbyists. For 3 weeks, helicopters flew over the dense Olympic Peninsula. Nothing, no wreckage, no oil trail, no emergency beacon. The helicopter, its call sign N481LM, had essentially vanished into the air. There was no indication that the pilot, Greg Mallory, had sent any distress signal. His flight plan was basic: depart from a private airstrip near Aberdeen, fly north along the coast, loop inland over the Quinault rainforest, then head east toward Mount Rainier before turning back. The route had no known no-fly zones or military testing corridors. And the weather that day, again and again, was logged as clear. 3 months passed, then 6. The family was presumed dead. Their names were added to the missing persons registry. But without a crash site, without remains, closure never came. Conspiracy theories began circulating on obscure forums, claims that the Monroes had staged their own disappearance, that the pilot was part of a smuggling ring, that the helicopter had crossed into Canadian wilderness and crashed somewhere beyond the range of search teams. The FBI briefly looked into financial records and phone metadata. Nothing suspicious turned up. The story faded until September 14, 2021. A retired forest biologist named Frank Henson was hiking deep in the western stretch of Olympic National Forest. He had no cell reception and no destination, just a compass, a map, and decades of experience. He was nearly 11 miles off trail in overgrown, uneven terrain that most people never saw, unless they were running from something or studying tree moss. That's when he saw the blades black, rusted, poking through a nest of vine, maple, and dead fern. An old helicopter fuselage canted to one side, its skids crushed beneath layers of fallen branches and soil. It took Frank a few minutes to reach, it brush slicing at his arms, mosquitoes buzzing like static. But when he finally cleared enough space to see the registration code, he froze. The tail read N481LM. He didn't go inside. What was visible through the broken door was enough: faded cloth, a pink child's shoe, and the corner of a blackened flight log. Frank hiked for 4 hours straight back to the ranger station and reported it. By the next morning, the site had been locked down. News traveled fast. The Monroe helicopter had been found, nearly intact, buried under years of growth, invisible from the air. It was 32 miles off course, miles east of the planned route. Deep in a stretch of forest no official search had ever reached. Rescue crews had assumed the pilot followed his manifest. He hadn't. The FBI, now re-engaged, brought in a forensic aviation unit. What they uncovered in the days that followed would raise more questions than answers. First, there was no evidence of a crash landing. The rotor appeared intact, the tail undamaged. There were no skid marks, no impact scars on nearby trees. It looked as though the helicopter had been gently set down and then abandoned. Second, No remains were found inside, no bodies, not even bones. Just for seatbelts unbuckled, 4 headsets dangling, and a child's stuffed fox wedged behind the co-pilot seat. The flight log had been burned intentionally, its cover charred, its pages brittle and black, yet under UV light a few entries could still be seen. The last leg was dated June 17, 2018. The entry below it, scrawled hastily and barely legible, read only, diverting. "He knows." Investigators were baffled. Who was he? A pilot? A threat? A pursuer? And why hadn't there been any sign of an emergency call or radio transmission? Even stranger, the terrain around the helicopter showed signs of human activity. That didn't match the age of the wreckage. Broken twigs, a rusted tin can with a Best Buy date of 2019, a cigarette butt, soaked and partially buried with a filter brand. Not sold before 2020. Someone had been to the site in the years since the Monroes vanished. Possibly more than once. The media had a field day. Headlines blared, "Ghost Copter Found." In Olympic Forest, pundits speculated about covert military tests, secret cults, remote survivalists. But for the families, especially Claire's sister Danielle, the discovery reopened old wounds. She had spent years imagining her niece's final hours. Now she was being told they might not have died in the crash. They might have walked away. Within weeks, the area was declared a crime scene. Cadaver dogs were flown in from Colorado. They reacted strongly to a patch of mossy soil 200 yards northeast of the wreck. Ground-penetrating radar confirmed what no one wanted to believe: a shallow burial site. A dig team uncovered bones, small ones, a partial child's jaw, vertebrae, and a denim dress with a unicorn patch, still intact, still blue. DNA confirmed it was Ava Monroe. Oh no, 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 no. Her body had been found, not inside the helicopter, but hidden nearby. The rest of the family was still missing. The investigation pivoted. This was no longer just a search. It was a homicide case. Someone had tried very hard to bury the truth. The news of Ava's remains being found shook the Monroe case wide open. The FBI's Seattle division assigned Special Agent Kendra Wallace to lead the reopened investigation. She was no stranger to cold cases. Her track record included identifying a serial abductor from a 20-year-old tire tread, and she had a reputation for being quiet, methodical, and brutally persistent. But even Kendra was shaken by what she saw at the site. The helicopter didn't crash, she told the team in her initial debrief. It landed, and whoever buried Ava did it carefully, but not professionally. Within 2 weeks, a full forensic grid search was underway around the helicopter site. Trees were marked with tape. Drones scanned from above, mapping the area in infrared. Volunteers combed through brush in tight lines. They found more small items: buttons from a child's sweater, a melted plastic fork, and a set of rubber-soled sandals buried in moss. Every piece was bagged and labeled. Then, 50 yards southwest of the main site, cadaver dogs hit on something else. At first, it looked like an old fire pit, overgrown and buried beneath wet leaves. But as the team cleared it away, they found a scorched circle of stone and charcoal, and at the center, a fragment of bone fused into melted plastic. DNA analysis later revealed it was from an adult female, Claire Monroe. Not long after that, another burial site was uncovered further uphill. This time, it was Nathan. He had been buried deeper, nearly 4 feet down, under a rotting log and layers of pine needles. His wedding band was still on his finger. Forensic analysis of the remains confirmed no signs of crash trauma, no broken bones, no evidence of blunt force impact. But a tiny fracture at the base of the skull hinted at something else. A blow, a deliberate one, that left only one person unaccounted. For Lily, the twin sister. Was she out there? Still alive? Had she survived longer? Was she taken? Or had she simply never been buried? Danielle, Claire's sister, had held out hope for years that maybe, just maybe, Lily had been spared. Now that hope twisted into something darker. She began visiting the crime scene regularly, walking just outside the perimeter tape, staring into the trees, as if expecting her niece to come walking out, barefoot and silent. The press began calling her the Watcher, She didn't care, but Kendra Wallace was convinced this had not been a simple case of a lost aircraft. It was murder, and the deeper she looked, the stranger it got. The pilot, Greg Mallory, had been 43 years old at the time of the flight, ex-military, no wife, no kids, no criminal record. His employer, SkyWest Excursions, had praised him as dependable but strict. His phone records showed nothing abnormal in the days before the flight. But when they pulled his background further, something stood out. 6 months prior, Greg had been in a legal dispute over a land inheritance with an uncle in Oregon. It had ended quietly with a settlement. The land in question was just 12 miles from the helicopter crash site. FBI agents flew down to interview the uncle, James Mallory, a stoic man in his 70s who'd lived alone for decades. He claimed to know nothing about the flight, said he hadn't spoken to Greg since the dispute, but his tone was evasive. When asked about visitors in the summer of 2018, he shrugged. "I don't keep track of who flies over." Still, it wasn't enough. To tie him to anything, no evidence, no fingerprints, nothing placing him near the crash. But the FBI didn't give up. They re-examined photos from Greg's apartment in 2018. In one picture, taken weeks before the flight, a small hand-drawn map was visible on the wall behind him. A blurry zoom revealed a set of GPS coordinates. Kendra's team plugged them into mapping software. The coordinates pointed not to the planned flight path, but to an old ranger station, abandoned in 1993, about 6 miles northeast of the helicopter wreck. Why had Greg marked that spot? Agents hiked there with ground radar. The building was mostly collapsed, vines and bark eating into the roof. But inside the rotting floorboards, they found something chilling. A child's drawing, torn, faded, but unmistakably recent. 2 stick girls, a tall man, and a helicopter, crudely drawn in black crayon. Above it, the word help was scratched again and again. It was dated in the corner. 2019. Could Lily have been alive a full year after the crash? And if she had been, where was she now? Meanwhile, the recovered helicopter was taken to an aviation forensics hangar near Spokane. Teams of engineers worked around the clock to piece together its final movements. The fuel line showed no sign of leakage. The avionics system had been disabled mid-flight, deliberately disconnected. Greg Mallory hadn't lost control. He had chosen to land. But why? Traces of rope were found beneath the passenger seat's new rope, not part of the aircraft. And faint fingerprints on the window belonged to Claire Monroe. But they were facing outward, like she had been banging to get out. It all pointed to something horrific. The family hadn't just gone missing. They had been taken somewhere, held, and killed. But by whom, and for what? The story was now national news. The Monroe helicopter case dominated headlines. Thousands followed the Reddit threads. Every podcast speculated differently. A survivalist commune, rogue ex-military camp, a drug trafficking route gone wrong. But Kendra Wallace stayed quiet, digging deeper into local landowners and property records around the site. Then she found it, an old lease agreement from 1997. Listing a hunting lodge deep in the woods near the area. It was purchased by a shell company, later traced to an alias linked to a man named George Wan. George had a record not violent, mostly fraud, fake names, unlicensed property flips, stolen identities. He'd done time and had been released 6 months before the Monroe disappearance. Most importantly, his last known address before disappearing from all databases in 2019 was a trailer compound in Oregon, just 15 miles from where Ava's remains had been found. It was too close to be coincidence. The FBI obtained a warrant. The team rolled out at dawn, and what they found would send the entire investigation spiraling toward something no one saw coming. The property was a desolate scatter of rusted-out trailers, forgotten sheds, and piles of garbage half buried under pine needles. From above, it looked like an accidental junkyard. But up close, there was something eerie about the place. Like time had stopped mid-motion. Your compound was silent. No cars, no people. Agent Kendra Wallace stood with her team at the ATE. Outer edge beneath the morning sun, scanning the maze of trailers like it might exhale at any second. She held up her hand, signaling them to spread. "Watch for tripwires," she said calmly, "and stay out of the sheds unless cleared." Then 15 minutes to confirm it. The place had been abandoned, but not for long. The coals in the main fire pit were gray, but still warm underneath. A box of canned beans on the ground had a receipt dated 2 weeks ago. Inside one of the trailers, a mattress was still warm to the touch. Whoever had been here had left recently, very recently, and they'd left in a hurry. The biggest find came in the smallest trailer, a dented silver Airstream parked behind a row of tarp-covered wood piles. Inside, it was cramped and windowless. A chemical toilet in one corner, a folding bed on the side. But what made Kendra stop cold was the table in the center. On it sat a box. Inside the box were dozens of personal effects. Ava's pink bracelet, Claire's sunglasses, a child's drawing with the name Lily scribbled backward in red crayon, and a photo one that had never been released to the public. It was a family shot. Nathan, Claire, Ava, and Lily standing in front of the helicopter on the morning of the tour. Claire was leaning in mid-laugh. Lily was holding a juice box. It was clearly taken by someone close, someone who had access, someone who had been there. Kendra closed the lid and whispered, "This was a shrine." They bagged the entire box and ran prints. Most came back unidentifiable or partial, but one lifted cleanly from the inside flap of the photo. It matched a man named Henry Wan, son of George Wan, age 32, former mechanic. No fixed address, no known job. But one hospital report listed him in 2017 with a broken arm and a head injury, sustained in what was described as an altercation involving a tourist. The location of the visit, a walk-in clinic just 12 miles from the Monroe helicopter tour facility. It took less than a week to track him down. He was living under a false name, renting a room above a closed pawn shop in Bend, Oregon. When agents moved in to arrest him, he didn't resist. Just sat there at the tiny kitchen table, eating dry cereal as if he'd been waiting. They brought him in for questioning. At first, Henry said nothing. He didn't ask for a lawyer, didn't deny anything, just sat blinking slowly, like a man who'd forgotten how to respond to noise. It wasn't until Agent Wallace walked into the room with the photo, the one from the box, that something flickered across his face. Recognition, but not guilt, something closer to grief. Kendra sat across from him. "Tell me about the Monroe family." Henry didn't answer. He just looked down at his cereal bowl. A long moment passed. Then he said quietly, "They weren't supposed to die." Kendra leaned forward, but they did. Still no response. "We know you were at the compound. We found Ava's bracelet, Claire's sunglasses. We know your fingerprints were on that box. Why keep them?" Henry stared at his hands. "Because no one else would." It took hours, but slowly, pieces of the story began to surface, not as confessions, but as fragments. Henry had worked for a small independent tour company in 2017, helping maintain the Monroe helicopters. He'd met Claire once, said she was polite, said the kids were quiet, not loud like the others. He mentioned one afternoon overhearing Claire arguing with Nathan something about unpaid debts, about pulling out of the tour before the season ended. Was someone pressuring them? Kendra asked. Henry didn't answer. But then came a twist no one saw coming, when asked about Greg Mallory. The pilot, Henry's body language changed. For the first time, he looked up. "He was my cousin," he said. Kendra paused. "Greg Mallory was your cousin?" Henry nodded. "By blood, barely. His mom and my dad were siblings. We didn't talk much, just when the family needed favors." That's when it clicked. Greg Mallory, the pilot, hadn't just landed that helicopter by chance. He had family in the area, family with a history of shady land dealings, family with grudges. And Henry may have been the one who brought the Monroes. To them, whether Greg knew what was coming or not, one thing became clear. The Monroes never stood a chance. But there was still one missing piece. Lily. Where was Lily? Kendra pushed Henry again. What happened to the other twin? He didn't blink, just whispered, "I don't know." That night, Kendra sat in her office, staring at the evidence board, photos, maps, timelines. But something felt off to clean too. Easy. Henry hadn't asked for a lawyer, hadn't denied a thing. And the way he spoke about the Monroes, especially Lily, wasn't like a killer. It was like a mourner. The forensic team revisited the old ranger station again, where Lily's drawing had been found. This time, they dug deeper literally. Beneath the collapsed floor, they uncovered a narrow tunnel, not a mine, something man-made, dug out with tools. It led to a crude room, stone walls, an old mattress, rusted lanterns, and on the far wall, written in charcoal, was a name, Lily. Below it, the same stick drawing. 2 girls. A tall man and something new, a broken helicopter. Was Lily held here? Was she alive longer than anyone realized? And, more terrifying, had someone kept her hidden on purpose? The ranger station tunnel changed everything. For the first time, the investigation had real evidence of confinement. Space meant to hold someone, and not just for hours or days. The mattress inside was torn and sunken, but there were signs of prolonged use. A bent fork, a plastic doll's arm, scratches on the wall, dozens of them in sets of 5, as if someone had been marking time or losing their mind. And in the far corner, buried in damp earth beneath the stones, the forensic team found a small Tupperware box. Inside, teeth, baby teeth, human, 4 of them, still tinged with dried blood. Dental records confirmed the truth. They belonged to Lily Monroe. The find devastated Danielle. She had clung to the idea that maybe Lily had run, maybe escaped, maybe lived a quiet life off the grid under a new name. But now, she realized the darker truth. Lily had been held and hurt. For how long? No one could say. But the dental development matched an age beyond her disappearance, which meant she had been alive at least a year, possibly longer. Agent Kendra Wallace stood in the room for nearly 2 hours that night, staring at the walls, the stick drawings, the name etched in charcoal, the quiet agony embedded in every inch of space. This wasn't just murder. This was prolonged psychological torture, and someone had done it deliberately. But who? All signs pointed back to the Wan family. George, the father, had vanished in 2019. Henry, the son, was in custody but barely cooperative. And Greg, the pilot, was long dead. His body recovered in a separate, shallow grave near the helicopter, wrists bound, throat crushed. It looked like he had tried to resist, maybe refused to play along, maybe tried to save the family too late. Kendra requested all of Greg Mallory's prior flight logs from SkyWest excursions. Buried among the paperwork was something strange. A second logbook, separate from the company records, in Greg's own handwriting. It listed alternate routes, landing zones, and diversion coordinates most near forests. State land, no cameras, no towers. One of them matched the ranger station. That's when the picture started to form. Greg had been running something on the side. Not weapons, but people. He would pick up families, tourists, couples, sometimes single passengers, and fly certain special tours that weren't on the official schedule. Some of these people never made it to the official drop zones. They were diverted, and what happened after that depended on who met them. The idea chilled Kendra to the core. It wasn't just a murder anymore. It was organized, coordinated. It was trafficking. And the Monroes. They may have just been the first to get attention because Danielle refused to let the story die. The FBI widened their search, property records, abandoned airstrips, deactivated tour permits. Soon, something emerged. For other, families had taken helicopter tours between 2016 and 2018 from SkyWest's regional partners. All 4 vanished. Official records claimed whether emergencies, unscheduled reroutes, or technical malfunctions. None of the helicopters were ever recovered. Families were quietly written off. Now the dots were impossible to ignore. This wasn't one act. It was a system, and somewhere inside it, a few key players were still out there. Kendra turned her focus back to Henry Wan. If he hadn't killed the Monroes himself, then who had? She brought him in for another interview. This time, she didn't talk about Claire, or Ava, or Nathan. She talked about Lily, about the drawings, about the teeth, about the room. Henry sat still, didn't ask questions. But when she said we think she was held at the ranger station, his hand twitched. That was all she needed. Kendra brought in a forensic psychologist, a woman named Dr. Evelyn Strauss. She had worked on hostage deprogramming and child trauma. Recovery for over 20 years. Then 1 hour of observing Henry, she gave her report. He's not the killer, she said bluntly, but he knows who is, and more than that, he's terrified of them. Kendra pressed. So he's covering. No, Evelyn said. He's obeying. The difference was crucial. Someone higher than Henry was calling the shots. Someone he couldn't betray, not even under arrest. But who? That answer came unexpectedly from a ranger. Just a week after the tunnel discovery, a state forest ranger named Toby Wilcox called in a tip. Said he'd been assigned to monitor backcountry logging routes near the Monroe crash site. One morning, he'd spotted a man, bearded, maybe late 60s, hauling a plastic water tank through the woods on a makeshift sled. What caught Toby's attention wasn't the man. It was the child following him, a girl, blonde, thin, around 11 or 12. When Toby called out to them, the man shouted back something about private property and not trespassing on one land. The girl didn't say a word. The next day, they were gone. The coordinates Toby provided placed the sighting just 9 miles north of the ranger station. Kendra's team moved instantly. Search teams, drones, bloodhounds. Nothing was left to chance. They found the sled abandoned near a cave opening, half collapsed from years of erosion. No one was inside. But in the dirt outside, a small handprint remained too small for an adult, but too large for a child who had vanished in 2018. Kendra's heart stopped. Could Lily have survived? Could someone have kept her alive all this time? If so, why? And, more terrifying, what had they done to her? The case had now fractured. In 2 directions. 1. A murder investigation into the deaths of Nathan, Claire, Ava, and Greg. 2. A search and recovery mission for a potentially still-living Lily Monroe. And somewhere at the heart of both stood a name that kept circling back like a stain. George Wan. The ghost no one had seen in 3 years. The man who may have designed this entire system. The man who knew exactly how to vanish. Danielle Monroe stood at the edge of the forest clearing where they'd found the sled. For the first time in years, she felt something she hadn't dared to feel in a long time. Hope. It didn't come from logic. It wasn't born from evidence. It was in the scent of pine needles, in the way the earth curved inward around the small handprint, and in the ache in her bones that told her Lily had been here. But had she left, and if so, with whom? The cave site gave the investigators little else. No clothing, no camp supplies, no biological evidence beyond the single smudged print. But a deeper scan revealed faint traces of ash in the upper cavern. Someone had lit small, controlled fires there, likely for heat, not cooking. Old animal bones, some chipped with tool marks, suggested someone had been surviving off the forest itself. It wasn't a holding site, it was a refuge. Someone, either Lily or her captor, had been living here and hiding. Kendra Wallace had the site sealed and ordered soil samples. They came back with human DNA, degraded, but still viable. It was Lily's. That confirmed it. Lily Monroe had been alive well after the crash. She had survived the initial incident. She had been moved, possibly more than once. The only question now, was she still alive? And if she was, why had she never been found? Kendra convened a multi-agency task force. They reviewed all known sightings, compared local vehicle reports, gas station cameras, forest permit applications. Every unregistered dwelling in a 50-mile radius was flagged. They focused on one detail, the name Wan. It wasn't just tied to Greg and Henry. The original Wan patriarch, George, had once filed for backwoods homesteading rights in 1983 in the same region where the helicopter debris was later found. He had claimed 200 acres of unregistered land that sat right between 3 counties, technically forgotten due to overlapping jurisdiction. Kendra pulled the original paperwork. That property, listed as Wilderness Parcel 17B, had no public road access, no utilities, no postal address. It was, for all intents and purposes, a ghost zone until now. A recon team hiked in at first light. It took 5 hours by foot. The trail was nearly invisible, winding between boulders and overgrown switchbacks. When they reached the edge of the Old Juan parcel, they stopped cold. At the base of a ridge, hidden beneath a thicket of Douglas fir, stood a shack weather-worn, boarded up, silent. The team waited. Drones scanned. Thermal imaging showed no movement inside. They approached on foot. No one answered the call. When they breached the door, the smell hit first: old sweat, damp wood, and something metallic. Inside, the walls were plastered with newspaper, inch. But not just any paper. They were obituaries, all for missing families, most from the area. Some as far as Nevada or Idaho, but at the center of the wall, like a shrine, was one article. Laminated, uncreased, for missing on family helicopter tours. Wife vows to never stop searching. Claire's photo, Ava's smile. Lily's crayon drawing scanned beneath it. Pinned above them, a child's sock, pink, worn thin. Kendra turned to the far end of the room. A trap door sat half open. Beneath it a crawl space. They lowered lights. Inside were jars, dozens of them filled with buttons, fingernails, and small cloth scraps, tokens, serial trophies. In that moment, they knew this wasn't just about the Monroes. This was a graveyard of memory. The horror of it made even the toughest agents back out. But Kendra stayed. She kept scanning, kept taking notes. She had to understand what kind of mind could do this, and more importantly, why. That evening, she received a call from a local mechanic. Someone who once worked with Henry Juan back in 2018. He said Henry had mentioned his father, George only, once and always with fear. One phrase had stuck with him: he doesn't kill for rage. He kills because he thinks he's fixing something broken. The statement chilled Kendra. It hinted at motive, not greed, not lust, but something deeper, a warped moral code, fixing what he thought was broken. The Monroes didn't fit a profile. They weren't rich. They weren't public figures. They weren't running from anything. But they were happy, solid, together. Maybe that was the trigger. Maybe to someone like George, when isolated, paranoid, and radicalized by his own pain, the Monroes represented something unbearable, something he wanted to control or destroy. They reviewed Claire's old social media posts. There was one from 2017, 6 months before the helicopter tour. A family photo at a charity gala in Seattle. Claire had been awarded a community service medal for organizing youth programs. Ava and Lily stood beside her, holding little paper awards. In the background of the photo was a man unshaven, narrow-eyed, looking directly at the girls. Enhancement confirmed it. George Juan. He'd been watching them before the tour. This wasn't random, it was targeted. He'd chosen them. And Greg, the pilot, had unknowingly handed his passengers to a killer. The pieces were beginning to arrange themselves into a clear but horrifying picture. George Juan hadn't just stumbled onto the Monroes. He had been stalking them for months. The photo at the 2017 charity gala was the earliest visual confirmation. But with that lead, Kendra's team pulled Claire's archived social media metadata and geotagged posts, running them through regional security footage from public parks, airports, even grocery stores. And he appeared again fuzzy in some frames, clearer in others. Once in the parking lot behind Ava's school recital, once across the street from Nathan's workplace, and once barely captured at the children's playground where Lily had celebrated her 5th birthday. George Juan had been tracking their entire family well before they booked the helicopter tour. This wasn't a crime of impulse. It was a calculated abduction. What chilled Kendra more than anything else was realizing just how close he had managed to get without anyone noticing in Washington's remote highlands. 5 miles north of the shack, a new lead emerged. A local herder named Ellis Bowman radioed in after spotting a suspicious structure while checking on fire-damaged trails. He'd seen it once before in 2019, a rusted mobile home hidden beneath a tree canopy. But when he returned in 2021, it looked like someone had been actively using it. Smoke had drifted from the chimney, and twice he'd heard movement nearby, but no response to his calls. The coordinates matched the wilderness border of Parcel 17B, the land George had once claimed. A tactical unit was dispatched. This time, they came prepared. Drone surveillance showed faint heat signatures inside the vehicle, low, like body temperatures at rest. The perimeter was sealed. Kendra stayed on comms. As the officers breached the rusted trailer, a shrill noise filled the air, like a kettle screeching. Inside was a woman, or what was left of one. Thin, gaunt eyes wild with confusion. She screamed when the door opened and curled into a corner. Her hands trembled, fingers curled in like claws. One of the officers recognized the face. It was Claire Monroe, alive but broken. She was transported immediately to Spokane General under deep sedation. Danielle Monroe got the call at 3:12 a.m. She sat up in bed, heart pounding. "Claire," she whispered, phone shaking. "You're sure?" "Positive ID," Kendra confirmed. "She's alive." Danielle burst into sobs so deep they stole her breath. Her sister, the woman everyone had assumed dead, had survived. But at what cost? Claire's condition was fragile. For 3 days, she remained mostly silent, speaking only in scattered phrases. "Treehouse. He comes back at night. Don't touch the doll. No noise, or he gets the belt." She flinched at bright lights, cowered from the sound of metal clinking. Even the knock of the nurse's clipboard sent her into a panic. The trauma was profound. Yet, beneath the layers of suffering, she was fighting to remember, to tell someone. On day 4, she whispered a sentence that stopped Kendra cold. He said Lily was too bright to keep. Kendra leaned in. "Did you see her after the crash?" Claire nodded weakly. "Was she alive?" Another nod. "Where did he take her?" Claire's eyes darted toward the window. To the other house, the one below the hill. But there was no other house on any map. They brought in a forensic artist. Over 5 hours, Claire scratched out a rough diagram, a ridge, a creek, a line of 3 trees bent. At angles, a boulder shaped like a shark fin. It wasn't precise, but it was specific. Search teams were reassembled. 2 days later, drones spotted the formation in the unmarked territory just past Parcel 17B. A cabin stood hidden beneath brush and moss, covered in camouflage netting. No one answered their calls. He breached at 6:15 a.m. inside the cabin. Was silent, sparse, lived in, but not recently. There were signs of a child, a cot, children's books, cracked plastic cup, and on the wall, scratched into the wood with something sharp. "My name is Lily Monroe. Am not dead." Kendra stared at it for a long time. Then she turned toward the kitchen sink. Inside was a child's toothbrush, still wet. They had just missed her. The FBI declared the cabin a high-priority target site and combed the area for DNA. They confirmed 2 new facts. 1. Claire had been there, though her DNA was faint. 2. George Wan's blood was found on a kitchen drawer, likely from a cut recent. He had been there too, which meant he was moving Claire and Lily between sites. Managing both captives for months, even years, without detection. And the cabin. It was likely Lily's primary holding place until something went wrong. Kendra now believed that at some point, George had lost control. Either Claire fought back and escaped, or Lily ran. But where? That question hung heavy, especially because Claire kept whispering another name in her sleep. Tommy. Tommy. There was no Tommy in the Monroe family. Danielle didn't know a Tommy, but the Wan family did. George's real name wasn't George at all. It was Thomas Wan Sr. He had changed it legally in 1977, after a prior arrest for child endangerment under the alias Thomas Way. Kendra stared at the document in disbelief. The man they were hunting, the man who'd orchestrated this web of terror, had changed identities before, and he had a son, not Henry, another son. He was born under the original name, Thomas Wan Jr., and he hadn't been seen in over a decade until now, because facial analysis of the drone footage from the first cabin showed a shadowy figure walking near the edge of the forest. It wasn't George. It was younger, faster, built differently. Kendra stared at the comparison overlays, the jawline, the posture. It was him. Thomas Jr., the one no one had looked for, was back. And that changed everything because now they weren't looking for just one killer. They were looking for two. By the time Thomas Wan Jr.'s name entered the investigation, everything shifted. For months, all eyes had been on George, the patriarch, the mountain recluse, the disturbed man with a history of abuse and obsession. But now another layer had emerged. Thomas Jr. wasn't just George's estranged son. He had a sealed juvenile. Record a trail of run-ins with child services, a history of violent behavior as early as age 11. The fact that no one had tied him to the Roe case earlier was due to his name change. After a short stint in youth detention in 2003, he'd vanished under the alias Mark Ellison, a name later linked to camping permit purchases in Washington wilderness zones between 2017 and 2020. He had been here all along, operating in the same forests, laying traps, monitoring hikers, and possibly hunting. Kendra Wallace now believed George may have been the lure. But Thomas Jr. was the executioner. In Spokane, Claire's memories were starting to return in fragile, fractured pieces. She recalled being dragged from the helicopter wreckage, Lily screaming, Ava already unconscious. Nathan slumped beside her. Then the forest, the blur of trees, the sound of a motorized cart, cold water against her skin, a dark basement, and a voice not George's calling her Red. It was Thomas Jr.'s nickname for her. She remembered him talking to Lily like a teacher, calmly, gently, while feeding her berries and handing her old books. But when Lily resisted, the kindness vanished. Claire said she heard slaps, screams, the thud of something heavy being thrown, then silence. Days later, she was moved to another location, one without Lily. She never saw her daughter again. Danielle asked her plainly, "Do you believe she's alive?" Claire's voice cracked. "I don't know, but if she is, she's not the same Lily." With George presumed dead and Thomas Jr. now the focus, Kendra restructured the task force. The search radius was expanded to 300 square miles. Every old forest watchtower, mining shack, or remote cabin listed in old federal or private land records was rechecked. It paid off. A 1972 ranger station, long since decommissioned, showed signs of recent use. Located near the Northern River Gorge, it had been stripped of its radio system, but still had structural integrity. Game cameras mounted in the trees revealed someone had passed through the area less than a week prior and left something behind, a shoelace. Pink with glitter, the same kind Claire said Lily wore in her sneakers the day they boarded the helicopter. Kendra held the lace in her hand like it was made of glass. This was the first physical clue of Lily's presence since the inscription on the wall. The area was declared a hot zone. But Thomas Jr. had vanished again until a local wilderness photographer unknowingly provided a breakthrough. He had uploaded a set of nature images to his blog, documenting owl nests. One of the frames, a blurry landscape with a hollowed tree in the distance, showed a figure peeking from the edge of a wooden shack roof, barely visible, but the facial profile matched Thomas Jr. The coordinates were traced. The area was 80 miles from the last known site. A zigzag pattern emerged, like he was moving. In response to their movement, always staying one step ahead, except this time, he left behind something else. At the edge of the shack clearing, buried beneath an overturned rock, they found a journal. It belonged to Thomas Jr., handwritten in aggressive scrawl, pages warped from moisture. Inside were entries dated sporadically from 2018 to early 2021. They began plainly. "Dad says they're better off without the noise of the world. She likes the forest. She just doesn't know it yet. The younger one screams too much. It's going to have to fix that." Then darker, "Red won't eat again. Might have to tether her." Dad slipped. Took him back to the ravine. The boy's gone. Buried deep. That line Kendra read it 3 times. The boy, that could only be Nathan. So he had been killed first, quietly buried somewhere deep in the woods. They now knew with certainty all. 4 Monroes had survived the crash, and the children were kept apart from the parents. One by one, Thomas Jr. had eliminated them in a controlled, deliberate pattern, like testing the boundaries of grief. The FBI went public with a regional manhunt. Images of Thomas Jr., now aged digitally to reflect his appearance, were circulated. Trailheads were closed. Helicopters swept zones nightly. Forest entrances were blocked off. And finally, one last breakthrough. A former forest ranger named Alvin Price came forward. He recognized Thomas Jr., said he'd seen him years ago as a teenager hiding near the back of the ranger station's old Armadillo Tower. He remembered the boy carried a leather pouch and spoke to himself. The ranger had reported it, but nothing ever came of it. But what he said next shook Kendra to her core. He called himself the Second Keeper, said the forest belonged to his blood. That phrase, the Second Keeper, matched a drawing they'd found in Lily's holding cabin, a picture of a dark figure with a key standing over a child inside a tree hollow. The keyhole had a number beside it. 4. Danielle immediately recognized it. Lily was 4 years old when they vanished. That number wasn't a symbol. It was a count. Thomas Jr. saw himself as a collector, a gatekeeper, someone who kept broken families from infecting the world. He didn't believe he was murdering. He believed he was preserving something, twisting trauma into purpose. And somewhere out there, Lily Monroe, if alive, was the last unfinished piece. Kendra stared at the tree drawing again. Then she stared at the coordinates of hollowed-out trees found within 50 miles of the new shack. All of them had been scanned and cleared except one. At dawn, the team arrived at Hollow Tree ID number 47. It had never been searched because of a rock slide the year prior that made the trail inaccessible to vehicles. But drone footage from 3 weeks earlier showed fresh soil disturbance. Approached cautiously. The opening was narrow. Inside, a wooden plank had been fixed into the hollow. On it lay a small plastic unicorn figurine, faded, dirty, but unmistakably Lily's. Claire had described it in 2018, a gift from her grandmother. Beside it was a cloth pouch tied with twine. Inside, a locket, photos of Ava and Nathan, and a note scrawled in uneven handwriting. I remember, even if they don't. Kendra closed her eyes. Lily was out there. She was surviving, and possibly watching them even now. But one thing was clear. The final answer was buried in the one place they hadn't dared to search. Where George Juan's body was last seen. The ravine. The ravine where George Juan had last been seen had become almost mythic in the search effort. Dangerous, unstable, and thought to be impassable after the 2019 rock slide. It spanned 300 feet across a steep, craggy basin with jagged boulders, moss-coated stone, and decaying logs. In the years since George's disappearance, no one had dared to attempt a full descent until now. The team was re-equipped with new gear, carbon fiber ropes, high-traction harnesses, and a descending pulley system used for mountain rescues. It took 3 hours to fully rig the system, with Kendra and a tactical forensics lead named Eli dropping first. The air in the ravine was different, colder, denser, as if the sunlight itself refused to enter. Their boots sank slightly into patches of black soil, and the silence was heavy. Broken only by the distant dripping of groundwater, 30 feet into the basin, they found something strange. A pile of flat stones, perfectly arranged in a rectangular shape like a crude grave marker. Kendra gave a signal. They began digging. What they found beneath was not a body. It was a box-weathered wood sealed tight with rusted metal clasps. Inside, documents, dozens of pages, handwritten maps, blueprints of old ranger stations, even photocopies of Monroe family press clippings printed and underlined. At the bottom, a photograph of Claire and Lily. It had a red X over Lily's face, and scrawled beneath it, "She sees too much." It was George Juan's handwriting, a sickening confirmation. He had been planning it all. The crash wasn't an accident. It was a staged disappearance. But as Kendra turned the papers over, she found something else tucked into the lining. A birth certificate for Thomas Juan Jr., but under mother's name, the line was blank. And under birthplace, it read unknown. Eli looked at her. That was a ghost. Kendra shook her head. He was a creation. That night, Claire had another breakthrough. After a gentle session with a trauma therapist, she sat up in bed, pale and trembling, but calm. "I remember where they took Ava," she said. It wasn't far from where I was held. I heard her calling once, just once. She sounded tired, like she knew no one would come. She paused. Then I heard the door slam and I never heard her again. Danielle, sitting beside her, didn't cry this time, just held her sister's hand. "I know she fought," Claire whispered. Ava wouldn't go quietly. With renewed urgency, the team returned to the cabin where Claire had been held. A forensic sweep revealed a small blood spatter behind a false panel near the floorboards. DNA confirmed it. Ava Monroe. There was no grave, no body, but there was enough evidence to classify it as a confirmed homicide site. Ava had likely been murdered there months, if not weeks, after the crash, and then buried. But where? That answer came unexpectedly. A soil sample from beneath the panel showed a mineral composition that didn't match the cabin's surroundings. It was lighter, drier, sandy, more consistent with the sediment found near the creek bend, close to the base of the ravine. The same area Claire had once said smelled like iron. Iron meant blood. They returned the next day. Using thermal radar and ground-penetrating sonar, they scanned beneath the brush. A mass was found 4 feet underground, wrapped in canvas. When uncovered, the body was too decomposed for visual ID. But the bracelet on the wrist, hand-woven with pink beads, was unmistakable. Ava's. Danielle broke down on the scene. So did Claire, who had insisted on being driven to the location. She didn't deserve that, she whispered through gritted teeth. She was only 14. Kendra knelt beside the makeshift grave. 3 confirmed. Deaths: Nathan, Ava, George. Only Lily remained unaccounted for, and Thomas Jr. was still out there, but the circle was closing. Later that night, Kendra received an encrypted message from a former intelligence analyst who had worked with the military's Environmental Surveillance Division. The man had been monitoring long-range radio frequencies across the SCU Northwest and had detected something strange over the past 6 months. Brief analog transmissions occurring in bursts every Thursday at 4:15 p.m., originating from the Cascade perimeter. The signal was weak, old-fashioned. But in one of the bursts, he caught a phrase. "The second keeper holds the root." That phrase again. Second keeper. En route. The man explained that in some old folklore, the root referred to the last living branch of a family tree, the final child, Lily. This wasn't a coincidence. Thomas Jr. was trying to preserve her as a final symbol, a living record of what he saw as a broken bloodline. He saw himself as the custodian, but something was wrong. The tone in the voice was panicked, faster, urgent, like someone losing control. 2 days later, hikers near a protected forest border stumbled upon something horrifying: a child's dress. Dirty, torn, clinging to a tree stump with a streak of dried blood on the collar. A small charm was pinned to the front. A butterfly. Claire confirmed it. Lily had worn that dress the day of the tour.
Ah!
The area was immediately locked down. But this time Thomas Jr. didn't run. He made a mistake. Shallow trap he'd set meant to snag raccoons had caught a boot print nearby size 10, same as the print from the ravine cave. Kendra realized they were closing in, but she feared what might happen once he realized that too. Because if he saw Lily as a root to be preserved, he might also see her destruction as the only way to prevent the infection from spreading. That night, Claire had one more memory. A cellar, stone walls, a lamp with no bulb, a hatch above. And Lily's voice saying, "He says he'll take me where the sky's always red." The sky's always red. That was George's old nickname for the cliffside. At Rust Hollow, where sunsets turned the rocks crimson and the tree line reflected fire in the lake water. It was also the last place George's radio beacon had been active in 2018. It had never been searched fully until now. The task force mobilized at dawn. Claire insisted on coming. So did Danielle. They didn't want to be spectators anymore. Wanted to be there to bring Lily home, alive or not. As they reached the base of Rust Hollow's cliffside, the trail narrowed to a winding ledge, and there, hidden behind a thicket of brush and netting, was a hatch camouflaged, locked from the inside, but warm to the touch. Someone was inside. Kendra signaled her team. They pried it open, and what they saw froze them in place. A small cellar, a flickering light, a blanket on the floor. And curled beneath it, a child, thin, pale eyes wide open. The child beneath the blanket wasn't moving. For a moment, no one breathed. Kendra crouched slowly and whispered, "Lily?" The girl didn't respond, but her eyes flickered. She was alive, thin, malnourished, face hollow with dirt smudged across her cheek, but alive. Claire stepped forward and fell to her knees. "It's me, baby. Mommy's here." The girl's eyes fixed on her. She blinked and then began to tremble, shoulders jerking with silent sobs. Claire wrapped her arms around her daughter, whispering over and over, "You're safe now. You're safe." The agent stood frozen, overwhelmed by the moment, but Kendra's instincts told her this wasn't over. Not yet. Not until Thomas Jr. was found. And not until the last answers were known. Lily was flown immediately to a trauma unit in Spokane. Doctors confirmed she was physically stable, severely underweight, iron deficient, and bruised. But cognitively responsive, she hadn't spoken much, but when she did, her voice was clear. She remembered names. She recognized her mother and aunt. And then, in the presence of 2 child psychologists and a forensic interviewer, she began to tell her story, piece by piece. After the crash, Thomas Jr. had pulled her from the wreckage. She had broken her arm. He splinted it with wood and wrapped it in cloth. He carried her through the forest to a small tent and fed her honey and foraged berries. He called her Little Root. He said she had survived because she was meant to. Remember, he made her draw pictures of her family again and again. Then he burned the pictures. Over the months, he moved her between hiding places, sometimes tree houses, sometimes underground pits. He made her repeat words like, "preserve," "cut the noise," "the weak don't last." He told her her family had died because they were selfish, because they had screamed, because they tried to leave. She asked where Ava was. He told her Ava had been freed. She asked about her dad. He said he begged first. But what Lily said next stopped the room cold. He said I wasn't the only one, that others came before me. Others. Claire leaned forward. Did he say names? Lily nodded. Sarah Dillon, a baby named Rowan, names no one recognized. They weren't in the Monroe family, weren't on any missing persons report tied to the crash, which meant they were from before.
Ow.
Kendra ordered a sweep of all coordinates tied to Thomas Jr.'s known movements going back to 2017. They started with the old shack near the eastern cliff drop, where he had been spotted in a blurred photo 2 years ago. What they found there broke the case wide open. Underneath the wooden floorboards, a crawl space. Inside, bones, not animal, human. DNA results over the next 48 hours confirmed it. 1 adult female, estimated age 30s, Caucasian. 1 male child, approximately 9 years old. 1 infant. None of them were Monroe's. Kendra cross-referenced cold cases from Oregon and Washington between 2014 and 2017. Matches were slow. But eventually one connected. Sarah Connell, age 33. Vanished in 2016 during a camping trip with her children, Dylan, 9, and Rowan, 18 months. The case was presumed a drowning. But the location of their last known sighting was within 30 miles of George Wan's old lumber property, which meant Thomas Jr. had done this before. The Monroes weren't his first victims. They were the first. To leave a trail, Kendra revisited George Wan's psychiatric records from the 1970s. That's when everything came together. George had been institutionalized after a violent episode where he'd nearly killed a neighbor over noise complaints. While there, he was part of a controversial, off-the-record family detachment program, occult-adjacent therapy that taught patience to isolate children from corrupt family influences. George had adopted 1 boy in 1988, age unknown, no legal name. The boy had no prior documentation. He had been raised off-grid, taught to distrust the world, and worse, to purge those who wouldn't adapt. Thomas Jr. had become George's instrument of cleansing. Every family he destroyed, every child he isolated, was part of what they called the Root Project. And George's final plan, to make the Monroe crash look like a tragic accident and start again with Lily as his legacy heir? Thomas Jr. had followed that plan until Lily resisted, until she remembered too much. But now came the final piece. Where was Thomas Jr.? Surveillance footage showed no signs of him near the cellar where Lily was found. Dogs couldn't pick up a recent trail. Had he escaped again? Then, deep in one of Lily's drawings, they found a clue. She had drawn a large red X over a cave near a lake, a place she said smelled like rot. She had only been there once, but she remembered it. The agents located it using drone mapping. What they found was harrowing. Inside, the cave was lined with scrapbook photos families, torn from old newspaper clippings. Some with X's across their faces, some circled in red. At the back of the cave, a small cot and a body mail, decomposed, gunshot wound to the head. A revolver nearby, dental records confirmed it. Thomas Juan Jr., dead by suicide. He'd been dead at least 2 weeks, which meant by the time they found Lily, he was already gone. No. He'd known they were closing in. He chose his ending, cowards. Exit, but also confirmation of guilt. His journal, found near the cot, ended with these words, "She wouldn't scream. She just stared at me. So, I let her go. The world can have her. I've done enough." The Monroe case was officially closed 1 week later. 3 confirmed deaths: Ava, Nathan, George. 1 confirmed murderer: Thomas Jr., 1 survivor: Lily, Claire. And Danielle held a private funeral in the mountains for Ava and Nathan. Their bodies laid to rest near a stream where they used to fish as kids. Claire asked for no media coverage. She wanted peace. Lily remained in therapy, but was showing signs of steady emotional recovery. She drew less now, spoke more, and when asked what she wanted to be when she grew up, she said softly, someone who helps kids find their moms. The forest felt different now, quiet or not, because the search was over, but because the storm had passed, a storm that lasted 3 years, one filled with silence, unanswered questions. Cain, no family should ever bear. Claire visited the stream every week where Ava and Nathan's ashes were scattered. Sometimes she brought Lily, sometimes Danielle, sometimes just herself. She no longer asked why. The answers had come, brutal, senseless, but complete. Lily began school again under a new name. No media, no interviews, no attention, just pencils and books and a backpack with butterfly pins. Danielle published a private memoir, not for fame, but for families like hers, to teach them that grief doesn't disappear. It softens, it bends, it finds its own rhythm. Agent Kendra transferred out of field duty 6 months later. But before she left, she visited Lily one last time. She brought her a music box, the same kind Ava had once played with. Lily turned the crank slowly, her eyes glancing up at the agent. "Thank you," she whispered, "for hearing me when no one else did." The song played softly, twinkling, delicate. And somewhere in that quiet forest, beneath the trees that had once hidden so much pain, a new chapter began, one of forgetting, but of remembering on their own terms. Because not every story ends with justice, but some at least end with truth.